Good morning, Korea. Good morning, Seoul. How many of you here are on Twitter? All right, well, on Twitter, I'm Crypto Man Run, and I want to keep this panel very interactive, and I really want to give you guys an opportunity to interact with us, knowing that this is being streamed and broadcast on CNBC's Crypto Trader, which is the show that I run for CNBC. It's a great honor and pleasure for me to be moderating a fireside chat with two titans of this industry. One which we all know and love, and most of us have taken some photos with Vitalik, and every now and then he even looks at the camera as opposed to over there and over there. And the other one is someone who's probably the most decorated cryptographer in the world. I mean, someone who's been around for a long time. In fact, if my maths is correct, you joined MIT in 1983, right?
Yes.
And then, Vitalik, you were about -11 then, right? And so if we're talking about the future of blockchains, I think what we need to do is really take stock of where it is that we are today. So if I look at where we are today, we are almost 11 years in a post-Satoshi Nakamoto world. I think at the end of October, we'll be 11 years into the beginning of a Satoshi Nakamoto era. We have one dominant protocol. I've heard you both separately talking about that dominant protocol as being slow, maybe inefficient, but it is the dominant protocol. Why
It is by market cap, it's not by daily transaction fees.
Correct. Why are we in a position 11 years later where there is only one protocol? Do you agree with my assessment, and why are we there?
I don't know, like markets are weird, right? So like, for example, when I was following the kind of Bitcoin block size wars a couple of years ago, I remember thinking that like there's basically two futures. One of them where kind of Bitcoin figures itself out technically from a scalability point of view and where it does really well, and one of them where Bitcoin does not figure these things out and it does not do well. And the world that we're living in now is one that I just did not expect, and it's basically one where, like, honestly speaking, scalability has by and large not been figured out, but at the same time it's one where Bitcoin is doing well. And I mean, this does suggest that there is kind of some spooky thing other than kind of direct use value that's driving these things. And I mean, economies are hard to predict, you know.
So you talk about scalability not being solved, and I think you were the one who spoke about the trilemma. Silvio, do you think that the trilemma still exists? I've heard you speaking about the trilemma not existing anymore, and specifically a lot of work that you've done about, getting scalability on a blockchain. Do you think that the trilemma is still as prevalent?
Well, first of all, let me recall the trilemma. So the idea is that it is hard to be both secure, decentralized, and scalable. And I'm sure that there are some definitional escapes in which you say, oh, it has not been solved because according to this definition it's not. However, I think we've done tremendous progress, and particularly we at Algorand focused on having a protocol that actually was fully secure, decentralized, and scalable. And so that is, I believe, is as it should be, that we have basic challenges, and when there is a community like ours, which is very aggressive and very innovative, we make progress. And so the previous challenge is solved. Now what is the next challenge? By the way, to your first question, I would say, well, it's not one protocol. There is many protocols. There is, however, Bitcoin is the dominant one with most of money and so on and so forth. But the community has already done a big leap in trusting this cryptocurrency. Right? Think how innovative it was. And so in some sense, having learned first, and hat off to Mr. and Mrs. Nakamoto for a great idea. And now we started getting comfort, and I'm sure that we will continue to evolve. It's just a few years. I know that impatient as I am, impatient all of us are, would like to have all this progress, instantaneously. But things takes time. But I think we are going in a good direction.
So let's talk a little bit more practically now. We're talking about the future of blockchains. We've now been around for a while. We've developed certain applications. what do we need blockchains for? How can blockchains really make our lives better? And, you know, I want to try and get away from this narrative that we had a long time ago where we said everything's going to be decentralized and we're going to overthrow governments, to saying more practically, how can blockchains change our lives? Vitalik, I think I'm going to look at you for this one.
Yeah, and I think first of all, there's all of the things that I just talked about in the presentation about how kind of blockchains are a good platform for kind of creating systems of rules in general that kind of span across large and diverse groups of people. And like that's a broad definition, right? Like that includes money, it includes kind of all of the decentralized finance stuff that's been happening. And I think like money in decentralized finance has been providing a lot of value already. Like I remember, for example, going to Africa and asking people, like, what have people concretely done with blockchains so far? And then if the answer was that like, up until now, most practically, it's basically that there's people who live in Africa who work remotely for software companies in places like the US and Europe, and they make money, and they use cryptocurrency to bring the money back home without losing like huge percentages of it to remittance payments. And I mean, like I saw a news article about like Palestinian people like doing a similar thing. So it's, I think just that is like probably the one place where cryptocurrency has touched, I mean, not the entire world's lives, but definitely quite a few people's. And I think like over time we'll see it broadening from cryptocurrency to all of these other applications as they prove themselves more and more.
Silvio, what do you think is the most important change that blockchain is going to make to our lives?
Well, and so I agree that payment is just the first level. But the most fundamental to me is the ability of injecting trust to enable two people who never met each other and therefore they don't even know each other to transact with trust. And I think in this world we need a bit more interaction and the ability to leverage the trust which is spread across all of us, that in which everybody believes. We ought to believe that the majority of us are fine, but you don't know the particular person. I think this ability to inject trust is going to be the best one. By the way, going back, because I'm going as the definition of a blockchain, we should understand that when we talk about blockchain, we are not talking about the concept frozen in time of today, right? So blockchain, I believe, is going to be like anything that counts in life, something that is constantly evolving. Life is about intelligence adaptation, and nothing can be useful to life and human life in particular unless it is able to evolve. So I believe that the way we understand the blockchain is great, it already has the potential for great progress for humanity. We will maintain the name, but underneath, I hope, that actually the meaning of what is a blockchain for humanity is going to change so that we can serve better and better not only our immediate needs, but also the needs of our future needs and the needs of our sons and children, etc.
If we want to get people to migrate what they're currently doing to similar blockchain applications or different blockchain applications that achieve the same thing, there's an adage that says something along the lines of that you have to develop something that's not the same or a little bit better, but maybe 10 times or 100 times better. What do you think we need to do to get people to start adopting blockchains as builders in the space?
I think the early adopters are always going to be the higher value adopters and the people for whom there like, literally is no place to go. And I definitely think we haven't fully exhausted those. Like, and within just payments, and there's a lot of people starting to do things. And probably the next kind of immediately or after payments would be decentralized finance. And like the holy grail there is basically people being able to kind of get access to like different kinds of financial exposure. Like if you're in some third world country, then you know how do you get access to the S&P 500? And if kind of there aren't any existing channels, then some of the decentralized finance systems that people are building are going to give you one of those channels. So like that's a kind of natural next step. And then after that, I think we'll get to use cases that are kind of lower value per person, but that touch kind of many more, even more people. And I think it will just kind of continue expanding over time. And every time we expand, that gives us kind of the resources and knowledge that we need to improve usability and scalability and all of these other problems, and it'll kind of keep on progressing.
Silvio, you are very passionate about decentralized finance, and it's become a big buzzword. And I think in Algorand, the term of frictionless finance is being thrown around quite a lot. Tell us a little bit about what frictionless finance and what does this borderless economy mean?
Well, first of all, let me, certainly blockchains and Algorand blockchains can be used for a lot of things, but I'm really passionate about this frictional finance. Let me tell you why. Because even though our lives have many dimensions and we want to be, it's very important to be free of constricting rules, free of transacting with every rule. But the first form of freedom is perhaps financial freedom. If somebody tells you, you're free, you can do anything you want, yet, but you are destitute, that's not so good. So I think that is why it's important. Now, frictionless, there are many aspects of friction. Friction of onboarding, friction of actual of a transaction. And somehow all of this cause humanity to become more and more, finance to become more and more centralized. Just assume that I want to transact with you. I want to swap an asset of mine for an asset of yours, right? But we are at a distance, we barely know each other. What do we do in the real world? We bring in another third person, say, I will secure your transaction. But by the way, he or she wants to be paid, okay? But then argues, I must be bigger than the two of you, because if you had to sue me, well, I must have real assets, and so therefore, you start saying, this has to be bigger than this. If that wants to transact somebody else, it ought to be somebody bigger. Pretty soon, we are going to have 5 or 7 entities in the world that are going to guarantee any transaction. Wouldn't this be ideal? For them, but for the rest of us, not at all. And similarly, for onboarding, I really believe in technology. I really believe that technology will set us free. But also for onboarding, when the blockchain starts growing, our children say, I want to be on board too. Yes, download the damn chain and keep going. How can I download a terabyte even nowadays? It's not so easy. Oh, then trust somebody. Well, what if I don't trust somebody? I don't know anybody whom I trust. Then again, I choose somebody who is large enough and powerful enough and rich enough that I can go after him for damages if whatever I downloaded for him is not right. And there is centralization again, right? It's a continual battle. I really believe that part of this friction was due to lack of technology. But part of this friction was also due to greed and, and desired. And I think that we should, at least for the technology part, give away the excuse. So there's no excuse anymore. We want to be decentralized and as efficient as a super centralized system. And certainly we can be much more democratic. And we're going to see an explosion of transactions if we achieve this really frictionless finance.
Now, I want to touch on a topic that I know is quite close to both of you, and that's privacy. Silvio, you spent a large part of your life talking about founding or building zero-knowledge proofs.
Yeah.
Vitalik, I know you're quite passionate about privacy and individuals' right to privacy, but when we look at a blockchain is by nature transparent, or supposed to be transparent. How do we merge this privacy world, and specifically zero-knowledge proofs, with the blockchain world?
So, I think we can't look at kind of privacy as a kind of context-free absolute good, and we can't look at transparency as a kind of context-free absolute good. I think it's kind of privacy of what and transparency of what that matters. And the things that I think it makes most sense to build are basically the things about kind of transparency of power and sort of privacy for individuals, right? So, if there's a system that kind of has a huge amount of influence over how resources get allocated and kind of how we're encouraged to behave, then the rules of that system are something that should be kind of transparent and open and verifiable by people. But in many cases, there's plenty of legitimate rationale for individuals' activities inside of that system to be private. And
do you believe that privacy is a human right? Do you believe that it's fundamental that everyone does have privacy? Because when we look at it today, the regulators and the governments, we don't have privacy as such. We're seeing just in our own cryptocurrency space that the privacy coins have been delisted off several of the big exchanges recently. I mean, do you believe that we have the right to privacy, or are we advocating more for transparency?
And I think blockchain ecosystems with no privacy and kind of society with no privacy in general is a very bad idea, right? And a society with no privacy is a society where every single thing you do is an action that you have to calculate to not only for your own benefit, but also to kind of look good inside of the thousands of political games that we all kind of inevitably play and with each other and just can't escape from every day. And I think only with a sufficient degree of privacy can we have a world where people are free to do things for their own happiness instead of being trapped in an endless cycle of having to look good in front of everyone else.
Silvio, you've done a lot of work on privacy. Tell us a little bit about, I mean, when we spoke, you spoke about this term called private transparency. Tell us a little bit about what your views on privacy.
Well, so my view on privacy, I think we all agree, and I think the investor audience also agrees. I mean, privacy is really perhaps a great engine of freedom, and so we can keep our freedom provided that we can get can be private. By the way, it's also true that each one of us has a private persona and a public persona, and both must exist. So I believe that it's very important. I devoted a big chunk of my life to produce privacy to the hilt, like with the zero-knowledge proof, so that they can actually distill what becomes public, the minimum amount that you want and you can determine. And I think that these things are important, and we should have an adoption which will require, it could be either a social consensus, if we can, or we can be an experimental consensus. One of the good part of our community is that there are many blockchains. So that is actually a great experimental ground. So some blockchain will experiment more on putting privacy emphasis on some things, some in others. Some are going to say or remain transparent and public. And we will learn exactly what we want in a market way, or perhaps after we learn it, we'll are going to disperse the right amount in each blockchain. Personally, it could be that if you take zero-knowledge proofs and the magic of mathematics around that, I don't need to see anything anymore because the validity of anything offered to me is okay. But just imagine what kind of a life it would be. So I just say, oh, here is a transaction. Is this valid? Oh, yes, see, I take it. So I don't see anything. One of the reasons I want to go on the square, think of it the square like the marketplace, is that I see activity. Very often I go in Seoul and in a different city than mine. I'd love to see what people buy. I don't know who they are, but I can see all the transactions. Isn't this fun? I think it is fun. So we should preserve this fun, and the trick is how to do it. And perhaps we should experiment, and at least at Algorand we are experimenting with another idea of a co-chain, which means you are private there, and you are private there, say blue co-chain, red co-chain, but then there is a public permissionless Algorand blockchain. And why? Because it allows you to transfer and transact with our private blockchain. So to me, that a little bit has a bit more of appeal because I want to be public, I go in the public square. When I go into my home, I expect some privacy there. So things that we do at home, maybe our family members should be aware, and then however become more public and transparent there. We must have this interplay. I think that being able to go in and out of privacy and to have enclaves well-defined of privacy, rather than injecting privacy everywhere, it may actually be preferable. But again, we don't have to decide now. There is many projects out there. Let privacy be picked up by some of them. See how we like them. Let's react, and we'll evolve.
Vitalik, you've shown a big interest in zero-knowledge proofs. what do you think the application of zero-knowledge proofs is specifically for your ecosystem?
Yeah, so I guess, like, first of all, we have to distinguish between the kind of 30-year-long kind of heritage of zero-knowledge proofs in general and this more recent trend in kind of succinct general-purpose zero-knowledge proofs that we've seen in the last 6 years. And like this second kind, the succinct general-purpose zero-knowledge proofs, like Snarks, Starks, Plonk, like these things are freaking powerful. Like, first of all, they're privacy technologies. And their privacy technology is that because of the succinctness properties aren't finally efficient enough to be useful for a lot of things. But second, they're also scalability technologies. And the way in which they're scalability technologies is basically that you can have one node do a computation and generate a proof of that computation, and they can then publish this proof, and this proof can be verified by anyone else in the ecosystem much more quickly than it took to generate the proof. Right, so I can create a block, and I can run a proof to show that the block is valid. I can publish the block along with the proof. And you, instead of verifying the block by running the computation yourself, you can just check the proof. And so this is one of the kind of key ingredients in kind of making an optimal solution to kind of moving beyond the trilemma, I think, in the longer term. And it's not a necessary one, but it's a really useful one because it allows us to bypass a lot of like honest majority assumptions, like fraud-proof timing assumptions and other things. And so it could really help in making safe and secure blockchains.
Yeah, by the way, they can be synergetic somehow, privacy and zero-knowledge proof as NARCs, which is essentially a mixture of CS proofs and zero-knowledge proofs for correctness, right? Because usually, how do we do correctness? By having everything transparent, right? But at the same time, if you obfuscate things somehow, you prevent an adversary to understand what is going on, and therefore you prevent an adversary from manipulating data. So there is a possible greater interplay between using zero-knowledge proofs in the form of SNARK, zero-knowledge proof CS proof mixture in the form of SNARK or STARKs, to really achieve part of the thing that we want to achieve, which actually is a correctness, rather than via transparency, via somehow privacy. But, and again, there are so many knobs to play, but in my opinion, we should really roll up our sleeves and figure it out, how to play these knobs, to have really a concert to put together things, and really do it in somehow a better world. Yeah.
Now, before I get into slightly more personal stuff, decentralization is a big theme, and we've been arguing about this. You know, what is decentralized enough, and we've, you know, etc. What steps are you guys taking in your own protocols to ensure decentralization?
Yeah, it's a very good question.
And particularly because we are moving to a proof of stake world. I mean, you've got an airplane that's flying and going to be moving to proof of stake. You guys have launched your airplane with proof of stake. Let's talk about the steps that you're taking in your individual protocols to make sure we're decentralized.
Sure. So I guess, like, first of all, proof of stake in general is a decentralization strategy. And like, I think proof of work did a good job of being extremely decentralized for maybe the first like 3 to 4 years of its existence. These are kind of the good old democratic days when people were mostly mining on their own laptops. But I think like over time, we've clearly seen how it kind of collapses into either ASIC farms or large-scale GPU farms, and people without a lot of money have a hard time participating. And with proof of stake, like if you have a few coins, you can join. And if you have even a very small number of coins, you can participate on kind of the same level as everyone else. Within Ethereum, so first of all, we're spending a lot of time on designing the protocol so we can handle a very large number of participants. So like instead of like 100 to 500, go up to hundreds of thousands. And this allows us to reduce the minimum deposit size to about 32 ETH. And another thing is that we're taking a lot of care to make the protocol kind of much more lightweight than ETH1. So for example, in ETH1, like, there's a lot of concern about like, oh, the blockchain is bloated, oh, you need an SSD, and it's like hard to run a node. And with ETH2, we're really trying to kind of cut down the minimal specs for participating in a node. even sharding itself, I think, is a decentralization strategy, right? Because you can totally run an arbitrarily scalable blockchain with no sharding. And the way that you do this is basically that you just require every node in the network to have like a huge data center, and like you can do this, and like it's called a consortium chain. But I think like we've even seen empirical evidence that those kinds of systems just inevitably collapse over time into like more and more centralization as people kind of get lazy and kind of all co-locate and run the same node. And then after that, there's a lot of kind of smaller decisions around kind of how incentives work, how penalties work, how depositing and withdrawing mechanics work. So, and we have this entire blog post, like our Serenity design rationale, where we kind of describe a lot of these details. So it's definitely a kind of evolution of thinking over the course of several years.
So from my side, so first of all, I really want to make a clear appeal to technologists, and because I say decentralization is not going to happen without technology, and we need more and better technology to bring it about. So, and I even think that even at a social level, when we try to organize ourselves as in civilization, right? And to say, without much technology, when society were very small, what are you going to do? You are going to have a dictatorship. It's the only form that makes sense. We are going to do whatever the dictator does. End of story. Even to have, representative democracies on a little bit a larger scale. I'm Italian, so I just look at the example of my ancestors, the Romans. They had elections 1 a year, okay? Now, okay, everybody has to go to Rome to vote. I mean, without technology, you can even support this. But what technology? Well, you must have roads, because if the journey to Rome, it takes you 3 months rather than 3 days, you will not go to Rome and vote, right? And if you were not enough infrastructure for places to stay in a secure fashion, if you were going to be robbed or killed on the way to vote, nobody would vote, okay? So right now, we are at the possibility with really the permissionless blockchain, if we manage to do things in a properly scalable, to have a form of direct self-regulation. But humanity never had the technology for doing it. So we are getting there. So that is very important to the decentralization is lovely, but we need more and better technology. But here we are at this specific point in time. So at Algorand, how do we interpret? We love proof of stake for the reason that Vitalik said. Proof of work was decentralized for 1, 2, 3 years. And after that, they lost interest in being decentralized. De facto, not because of malice, because it becomes so costly that fewer and fewer players can afford it. So, but in proof of stake, we privilege what we call it pure proof of stake, and anybody else should experiment with different things. The nice part about Mimeni is that we can experiment. What is pure proof of stake? It means that every token that you have contributes to the consensus protocol. Okay? That's what it means. And we don't have to have actually to lower the bar of how many tokens we should have. The problem is technologically so sophisticated that can allow any token, or even a single token, to be called without being put in a sacred place in the middle of a table, bonded for some reason. Your token can be whenever you want. In your wallet, ready to be spent at your fingertips. It can be invested in one of the many opportunities the blockchain offers to you, particular financial opportunities. And wherever it is, you have the ability to use for voting. And without taking much computation. So I think that is our interpretation. I'm sure and hope it's not the only one, but we need ideas of this case, of this type, where we can put more and more of us to participate to consensus, to take charge, to be a real citizen of this borderless economy.
I don't want to spend too much more time talking about this, but if every token in the network is a participant in proof of stake, how do you prevent bad actors in a consensus algorithm like that?
Why do you have to prevent it? So the idea is that if you have to orchestrate the somehow you have to orchestrate the protocol so that if the majority of the money is in honest hands, the protocol works. Mm-hmm. So one way to do it, which is a bit simpler technologically, but it could have also advantages that in some other way, is to say, well, let's delegate, right? So let's put a bunch of delegates and their tokens determine the block on behalf of all of us, right? So, but that is delegated proof of stake is one, there is bonded proof of stake, there is all kinds of other things, proof of work is another, but they suffer, in my opinion, and I don't want to overgeneralize this, of the following problem. The logic, which is a bit questionable in my mind, is the whole economy is secure if and only if the majority of this small part of the economy are honest. Personally, I think this is a recipe for disaster. Because who are these small part of the economy in Bitcoin? The miners. So, I mean, I don't know if there are economists here in the room, but you say in the GDP of the world, what fraction is represented by the miners? Do you want to have that the entire economy goes into their hands? I think it's a bad idea. In delegated proof of stake, what are these small part of the economy? They could be the delegates. 21, say, somebody assumes. 50, it doesn't matter if it's 21, 50, 100 or more. So that is a way that has something bizarre to it. When you instead depend on the majority of the money to be in honest hands, the reasoning goes a little bit different. I cannot so easy within the system go and bribe a few miners or a few things to bring down the economy. It should be that the majority of the token holders collude with each other to bring down that very economy of which they have a majority of. I think that this is a kind of hard to happen. So that's why I'm passionate about this approach. But there again, pure proof of stake is one approach. There may be others. We should explore them, and we should really resist the temptation to be centralized. Because somehow our bodies are not centralized. Nobody says, who is in charge to tell the T cell to boost up my immune system? It doesn't work that way. So we are all decentralized. But somehow when we program, when we orchestrate things, when we design things, somehow become centralized naturally. So we should...
So what you're saying is, in a nutshell, you're not a big fan of Libra.
Well, I'm saying...
I don't want to put you on the spot.
Yes. I mean, I see it as... Vitalik might say, I don't want to put in this word also. So it's 100 people, friends of each other, co-located in North America, who should decide for us to be really validated. Really? The world is a bit of a better place. And I'm surprised there are somebody who don't like Americans. Can you believe it? Oh, well, would they like those 100 people? I wonder. So, there is diversity in the world, and I think if you want to celebrate diversity, if you want to be decentralized, it's not going to be 100 people or 1,000 people. It really should be a system that calls all of us into play.
Very, very good answer. Now, I want to break away from technology and decentralization and all of those things. And I want to actually get to the more personal side of why we're doing what we're doing. And Silvio, I want to start with you because you are possibly the most decorated person in cryptography in the world, or certainly that we know today in the world. And you were around before Satoshi Nakamoto, and you've been around after Satoshi Nakamoto. What's the difference? How did Satoshi Nakamoto's paper change cryptography?
Well, I have two things to say, so don't gasp at the first one. So Satoshi Nakamoto has not changed cryptography at all, but he has done something better. Mm-hmm. So what he has done, he has used very elementary cryptography to provide a very brilliant solution to the older problem of consensus. Okay? So somehow, for instance, given we already know how much age distance is between me and Vitalik, so I granted my first PhD to a wonderful graduate student at MIT, and in 1985.
So Vitalik was one.
Vitalik was one.
So
yeah.
Silvio had his first PhD when Vitalik turned one.
All right. But really, I'll tell you the truth, that is good. So you are a professor because you love to interact with students who are younger than you. And I think that's the only way the world works. And so I think it's one of the most wonderful, because it brings you in, and I think the young people are the one that should drive forward, and some experience somehow may help. Here in which helped, at least in my case. So I granted this PhD on what? On a probabilistic Byzantine agreement. We've had cryptography. It was a very strange architecture of bivariate polynomials, complications like this, 85-page paper. And then suddenly, eventually, I learned about a Bitcoin.
When did you learn about Bitcoin?
Actually, very late, because it was very cozy in my ivory tower, doing my own research. I would say 15, 16, something like this. Yeah.
And I mean, we are running out of time, and I really want to get to Vitalik as well. But Silvio, you've been sitting in the ivory tower of education and academics for so long, but now you've taken the jump from education and academics, and now you've joined a project. I mean, you're backed by VCs. You've got big names behind you. What was the rationale to move from that to running commercially?
Look, I'm an impatient man. I really believe in science. I think science will change the world if properly used. So we must make sure that it's properly used. So I was at the very beginning of the inception of public key cryptography. It took 25 years before somebody signed a transaction. So all of a sudden, I was very frustrated. So all of a sudden, says, oh, I finally got this idea. I says, oh, yet again, by the way, which was to use different type of consensus to, instead of proof of work, to improve consensus. So the pendulum goes from classical consensus, proof of work, and now it's going back at least one time in this. And I think that the only way to do it is to say, to roll up your sleeves and get there and get things adopted as fast as you can, rather than hoping, if they're a good idea, somebody will sooner or later will adopt them. That model didn't quite work, at least it did not work as fast as I wanted.
So 30, 40 years from now, what do you want to be remembered? What do you want your legacy to be in this blockchain space 30 years from now, 40 years from now? Vitalik will ask you the same question, but in about 300 years.
Well, let's say, I really hope this pure proof of stake type of approach. I think it is good from a technical way, but actually to have really a frictionless finance to have contributed to it, I would be very happy. So I think from the social good, frictionless finance, and technically this proof of stake protocol, which is a bit more complicated, but actually can be your friend really, if you once you understand it. Yeah.
Vitalik, so I mean, you've got a list of achievements in this industry at such a young age, which is probably unparalleled for someone your age. You've built amazing things. You're the founder or the writer of the white paper of the second biggest protocol at the moment. But when you wake up every morning, and putting the technology itself aside, what keeps you going? What is it that drives Vitalik? Is it to keep developing new cool shit and to make the protocol to be much more efficient? Or is there a bigger purpose when you wake up in the morning?
It's some of both. I mean, I definitely think that blockchains are new cool shit, and I hope that they continue to become even cooler. But also, I believe in the promise of the decentralized economy, and this idea that on top of these platforms we can build new things and new platforms and institutions that can be more much more free, open, and inclusive than the things that came before.
So I know that you have a big interest in longevity, and you spend a long time thinking about longevity. So under the assumption that you're going to live for another 150 years, more or less.
I'd prefer 150 million, but
So under the assumption that you're going to be around for a long time, what does success look like in your lifetime? Like, when would you sit back and say, this vision, all this work that I've done, this is really paid off, and I know this because when I look around me, what happens?
I mean, can we predict? I guess, I don't know. Sometimes the future takes weird twists and turns, right? So, for example, like if you look at something like Linux, right, it's been kind of this big dream of like, let's use open source to take over and like, let's get everyone using it as an open source operating system on their computers. And that's it's gotten somewhere, but it's not gotten kind of as far as people hoped. But then at the same time, like we're using Android on our phones, which is basically Linux. Half the world economy runs on Linux. So I think the way that blockchains succeed could easily be kind of very different from the way that we imagine that it succeeds today. And so, and I think because of that, it's also just important to kind of keep all the doors open. But also, there also is a difference between kind of blockchains and like what our values are. And like it's important to kind of keep the second in mind and not just be kind of pushing for the first in whatever way possible. Like because like if it turns out that blockchains kind of just get used by kind of every bank to improve like high frequency financial efficiency by like 3.9%, then like that will be quote mass adoption, but that won't be kind of something meaningful that's kind of worth all of the hard work that people get every day excited about. And I think looking at specifically kind of, are we going in like, a way that actually gives us more the things that we're actually here for is also something that's sort of important to keep in the back of your mind.
When you think about your achievements to date at such a young age, do you sometimes look at the stuff that you've achieved? Are you proud, or are you still like work in progress? And do you celebrate? Do you celebrate?
No, 100% work in progress. Like,
but do you celebrate what you've achieved until today? I mean,
yeah, and I think the space's achievements until today have definitely been significant. But like, I think we're halfway up the exponential curve. But if you look at the y-coordinate, halfway up the exponential curve is like still really close to zero. So we have a long way to go.
So, for you, 300 years time, how do you want to be remembered?
I don't know.
Great. Well, that is all the time we have for today. I would have loved to get an answer from Vitalik, but I guess not. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's been a great pleasure. Hey. Thank you.